And welcome back to Conversations with Great Minds. I'm speaking with former CIA analyst Ray McGovern, co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Ray, John Brennan, we were talking just a moment. First of all, did you want to finish any of your thoughts from the previous, you were leading up to, then the Senate torture report came out?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to finish up the evaluation. When Jay Rockefeller became head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and Pat Roberts went back to Kansas, so to speak, he issued a report, a bipartisan report, including Chuck Hagel and Olympia Snow signing on, saying the intelligence adduced to justify the war in Iraq was unsubstantiated, contradicted, or even non-existent, period, end quote. Non-existent intelligence? Atta in Prague, these kinds of things.
Right.
What an indictment. So that it's on the record, and yet Chuck Hagel and Olympia Snow, so that much is beyond dispute.
Wow, wow. John Brennan, the discussion has, in the mainstream media in the United States, seems to have moved away from, is this who we are? The question that President Obama keeps raising, this is not who we are, with regard to torture. Is this who we are, or is this even legal? They've moved along from that to, does it work? And I'm sure that Sunday when on Meet the Press, when they interview Dick Cheney, it'll be, he's going to stay away from is it legal, and he's going to focus on is it effective. And here's what John Brennan had to say about this yesterday.
Our reviews indicate that the detention and interrogation program produced useful intelligence that helped the United States thwart attack plans, capture terrorists, and save lives. But let me be clear. We have not concluded that it was the use of EITs within that program that allowed us to obtain useful information from detainees subjected to them. The cause and effect relationship between the use of EITs and useful information subsequently provided by the detainee is, in my view, unknowable.
So I'm astonished by this, because it sounded to me like what he said is we cannot make that connection, and it's unknowable, and yet this statement is cited all across the media as saying, John Brennan just said torture works. A, I'm curious your thoughts on whether torture works, and B, I'm curious your thoughts on what John Brennan just said, and C, I'm curious your thoughts on the shifting of the dialogue from the moral and legal position to the kind of, on the ground, in the weeds, what works and what doesn't.
Well, John Brennan is counting on very few people reading the report, okay? Right. What he said was wrong. What he said was a lie, okay? And immediately, Dianne Feinstein tweeted, and she said, that's false. We know that the intelligence that was useful was garnered before the torture, before the EITs, okay? We know that. That's what our study was all about, okay? So he's being very disingenuous, saying we can't really be sure because we tortured them. In fact, they tortured people after the FBI had gotten really good information. Abu Zubaydah is the really good example of that. So forget about that. The EITs, they didn't yield any demonstrable good information. So that's number one. Number two, well, you mentioned the moral aspect here. John Brennan went to Fordham University at the same, well, he was about 6 years behind me. The Jesuits there taught me that there was a category of intrinsic evil, okay, that you couldn't get authorization to do, okay? You couldn't authorize somebody to rape somebody else, okay? Right. You couldn't authorize somebody to enslave somebody else, and you couldn't authorize somebody to torture somebody else. Human beings were not allowed to do that to other human beings. End of story. Intrinsically evil, always evil, and the Convention Against Torture says that, 1990, espoused by Ronald Reagan, signed by, well, passed by the Senate, signed by George H.W. Bush. No extraordinary circumstances. War, rumors of war, terrorism, nothing can justify the use of torture. So that much is clear. Now, we're not talking about that in this country. We're talking about whether it works, okay? Well, okay, let's talk about whether it works. On the day that George Bush went before the reporters, it was September 6, 2006, to advertise the efficacy of these, what he called an alternative set of procedures, which later translated into, these enhanced interrogation techniques. That very morning, John Kimmons, the head of Army Intelligence, didn't get any press, okay? I'm very proud. I was an Army officer in infantry and intelligence. He went before the cameras three hours before Bush, and he said this, and I quote, "No reliable intelligence has ever come from abusive practices, period. History shows that, and the empirical experience of the last 5 years, hard years, also demonstrates that, period," end quote. 2006, -5, 2001, when the first one was John Walker Lind was tortured, as we know. An American citizen was wrong place at the wrong time. So torture doesn't work. Everybody knows that, okay? Now, why would they do it if it doesn't work? Well, if you want reliable information, Tom, it's not going to work. But if you want unreliable information.
Yeah, if you've got a war based on lies, then you're really interested in lies?
Well, yeah. Well, if you want to have intelligence, in quotes, that shows that Saddam Hussein was in league with Al-Qaeda, which in turn was responsible for 9/11, well, all you need to do is get somebody like al-Libi, a real person, who had some vague connection with the travel agency that sent people around from Al-Qaeda, and get him to confess that he sent all manner of folks up to Baghdad to get trained in weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological weapons, exposed to their nuclear program, and explosives.
Did he say that under torture?
Well, he didn't say that for our interrogators, so we sent them to Egypt, which has a little bit more experience with enhanced interrogation techniques. He told Egyptians that, and the report came back on the 5th of October, 2002. On the 7th of October, President Bush said, "We have a source now that has confirmed that Saddam Hussein is training al-Qaeda in weapons of mass destruction." 3 days before Congress was asked to vote to give Bush permission for war. Colin Powell used the same report a couple months later on February 5th, 2003. He didn't know, to his credit, that's to his credit, but you're not supposed to be naive when you're Secretary of Defense. He didn't know it was the same guy with the same crock. That's what we call it in the Bronx, a crock, made up, okay? But you know what? When we started a war in Iraq, 69%, according to the poll, 69% of the American people thought that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. That's why it was so simple. That's why our media could play along with that and justify, in quotes, an unjustifiable war.
Wow. So torture, I mean, historically, torture was used. If you look back at the pogroms, at the Spanish Inquisition, at the arguably you could go back to the Crusades, but the more recent, the Salem, the witches in Massachusetts.
They all confessed, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because the Iron Maiden, they were shackled, they were tortured, they were frozen, they were yeah.
4 years ago, Tom. Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, got up at the Senate and he says, "I know why these enhanced interrogation techniques are used. They've been used for 500 years. They work." Hat tip to the Inquisition. I couldn't believe it.
That's astonishing.
They really work if you want, you want confessions of that kind.
Right, if you want people to say what you want them to say. One of the things that concerns me is where, how this behavior that we engaged in from 2001 until 2006, the torture, how that's going to affect us in the future. The FBI, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, the FBI interviewed, for example, Mohammed Atta, the guy who was apparently the organizer and planner of 9/11, and with their normal practices, getting to know somebody, building rapport, all that kind of stuff. And he told them everything, all the useful information he gave them. Then they went off and tortured him, waterboarded him over 100 times. He told them nothing of value as a consequence of that. But I don't think that when he gave that original information, when the FBI was being nice and friendly to him, which is one of the most effective ways to interrogate somebody, I don't think he believed that if he gave the correct information, if he told the truth, that he would then be subject to torture. In the future, though, the next Mohammed Atta or Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I'm sorry, that's who I was talking about. Mohammed Atta died in 9/11. Yeah,
right.
KSM. Now, the next Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is going to be thinking, okay, I tell them the truth, and then they're going to take me off and torture me. So why tell them the truth to begin with? I mean, have we blown up our ability to gather information?
Well, you know, this has happened before. You know, there were abuses during the World War II, okay? And there were certain Marines and American officers who refused to resort to these tactics, okay? One time, there was a Japanese senior officer hiding in a cave on one of those islands in the Pacific. And the sergeant said, he's right in there, let me spray him. And the lieutenant says, no, you don't spray him. Come out with your hands up. Get somebody. He talked French, okay? And he told, he knew about the Japanese codes, okay? He was flown right back to Honolulu, back to Washington. He helped us break those codes. Now, think about it.
Prisoner.
Yeah, think about
He
that.
helped us break the Japanese
Okay,
law.
so you're gonna spray him, right? Well, number one, if you get a reputation for doing that, nobody's gonna come out with their hands up. They're gonna shoot to the last man.
Right.
So there are lots of reasons why sensible people, and I was trained in Army intelligence, realized that rapport building is the only way you can have a chance of getting reliable information, and it's just a human thing.
Yeah. We have about a minute and a half left, Ray. I wish we had another couple of hours. What do you think is are the most important things that we need to be doing now to resolve this episode in history?
We have to prevent the press from giving Dick Cheney equal time. He's already said, I'd do it again. Well, you know, he'd do, what is it called, rectal rehydrations again? Right. I don't think I think we have to stand up and say, look, these people are not, the other side of the story. They're responsible for this stuff. CIA directors, 3 of them, intimately involved in torture. You're going to take their words for it? So we have to kind of stand up and say, look, we want the whole story. We want people to read at least some of this report and form their own conclusions, because Obama is right rhetorically that this isn't us, this isn't America, but he's not got the spine to do anything about it. We have to put the spine in him and make sure this doesn't happen again.
We do this by speaking out, by contacting members of Congress.
And getting our lawyers to pursue this. There is the concept of universal jurisdiction. We got Pinochet that way. Bush had to cancel a trip to Geneva, and Rumsfeld had to run away from Paris three years ago.
Ray McGovern, it's an honor and a pleasure to
It's
talk
fun,
with you.
Tom.
Thank you. Thank you very much. To see this and other Conversations with Great Minds, go to our website at conversationswithgreatminds.com.